So thanks, Blair and Dallas, for inviting me um, to be part of this Reactivating the Archive project. And one of the things that I love so much about Art Metropole is I feel like its ability to connect the dots, right? This event that's happening here, Reactivating the Archive, is connecting to something that was happening in the late 80s, activating the archive, which is itself reflecting on its own archive and series of video series as we just heard. And I'm hoping that the presentation today, it's going to be fairly short, but that it'll do a little bit of a job of connecting the dots around Colin Campbell's work and around Bad Girls in particular. So I'm here to talk about this publication from 1993. It's titled Invention, Selected Works, 1972 to 1990. And it's a publication written by Peggy Gale that accompanies a series of 3 videotapes that is a compilation of Colin Campbell's videos from 1972 to 1990. And just like as a little background, Colin Campbell's videos were published here, but they were also internationally exhibited, including MoMA in New York, the Whitney Museum, the Pompidou Center. And Colin Campbell represented Canada at the Venice Biennial in 1980. So the time that Bad Girls was being screened is the same time as when Colin Campbell's work was presented in Venice. So I'll just begin by saying Art Metropole has had a long time involvement with artists' video works. Back in 1976, they published a book titled Video by Artists, also written by Peggy Gale. A very important early publication, artist videos. The following year, there was a screening in 1977 titled Public Places as Performance Space, new videotapes by John Orenlicker. And in the following year, in 1978, Art Metropole published a newsletter, which is a video by artist checklist. Now, video is pervasive. We all have a video camera in our phones, in our pockets. But think of the time when Colin Campbell's work was being made. So the late 1970s, 1980s. This kind of ubiquity of video, and especially artists adopting this new technology of video, was extremely rare and unusual. So in the Inventions publication, Peggy Gale writes, when Colin Campbell made his first videotapes in 1972, the medium was little known, still new. In those days, television arrived in the house via the airwaves and was produced, as everyone knew, in a studio with a large staff and expensive, complicated equipment. Nowadays, so remember she was writing in 1993, the VCR, home video camera, and cassettes are common, and broadcast or cable is by no means a viewer's only option. Much has changed. So we can reflect on how much has changed since then in terms of our relationship to video and the ubiquity of video. But I do find it interesting that I think today's TikTok video producers find a direct precursor in Colin Campbell's work from the 1970s and 80s. Now, I just mentioned something about the medium, but I think the relevance of Campbell's work is not due precisely to his choice of medium. As Peggy Gale continues to write, the issue of sexual identity continues to be a text only slightly submerged in Campbell's work. So you can see in the character of Robin, the character is a female character. I'll continue quoting from Peggy Gale's text. He, Colin Campbell, often chooses actors to work against type, possibly against gender, as he has done in his own characterizations. He has often taken the part of the other, man as woman, to see how it feels and what it looks like. Is this identity real? Is this enough? Does this does this person make more sense than the one I would normally be? Or, she continues writing, who are my friends and intimates, and what am I doing with them, for them? Can I find a voice and a persona to bring their needs and demands into the open, to find an audience for these facts and feelings? And these are the aspects of Colin Campbell's work that intrigue me the most. So that's why I decided to select it for this event tonight. I remember first stumbling into Art Metropole in around 1990, when I was still fresh out of high school. So I graduated high school in 1988. So a couple of years later, I found Art Metropole on King Street, not really knowing quite what Art Metropole even was. The space was above the Carmen Lamana Gallery on King Street, and it was filled with wonderful weirdness. Some things don't change. I remember finding there was a box of discounted books, these amazing weird publications that you could buy for $1 or $5. And as a poor student, that was kind of my treasure trove. I remember on that visit, I bought some copies of General Ideas File magazine. So I bought the last 3 issues, I think for like $1 each, or maybe $5 in total, or something like that. And I also picked up a copy of John Jack Balin's fanzine. As I was preparing this talk, I looked online to see and fanzine, these issues of fanzine now cost $100 US on A-books to start. It goes from there. Anyway, I didn't know anything about General Idea, who published File. I didn't know anything about John Jack Balin, who did fanzine, but I was drawn to their work. I didn't have the words for it back then, but I could tell that there was something queer about these publications. Theirs was what I felt was an aesthetic of outcasts. Now remember, we're talking about 1990. This is a time of kind of like the nightmare of the AIDS epidemic. And try to think on the massive homophobia and moral panic that politicians were so quick to mobilize at the expense of people living with AIDS. So a very intense moment. So for me as a young person, finding these publications, this aesthetic of outcasts, felt like manna from heaven. I was a kid who was curious about the art world, but I didn't know much about it. I started going to galleries, I started exploring the artist-run centers, but I never went to art school. So I didn't have the social group to grant me entry into an art world. At that time, I would say I didn't exist, right? But I love zines, and I love weird little publications that Art Metropole is such a kind of epicenter for. Back in high school, I had co-published a zine with some of my high school friends titled Salmon Hat. I also hung out with G.B. Jones and Bruce LaBruce, who did another zine titled JD's. So I had a certain affinity for this kind of self-produced DIY culture. And then 6 years later, once I was kind of participating more in the art world, this is kind of like let's say mid-90s, I was in the midst of a kind of explosion of artist collectives in Toronto. The 90s in Toronto were a devastating time. It was a very right-wing conservative government in the province, the government of Mike Harris, who was kind of slash and burning society. I remember 1 week, welfare would be cut 30%. So think about that impact on a poor person's budget. Then the next week they would announce they'd close women's shelters. Then the next week they would announce they would close all these schools and hospitals. And the next week, so it felt like being pummeled for literally the whole decade. As a young person, I thought, okay, the grants are being cut, everything's being cut. How are artists gonna react? And it taught me a lot to see that the artists just one generation older than me, rather than doing less, they did more. That's something I carry with me even to this day. In this kind of moment of attack, artists didn't kind of shrink. Artists did more. And what they did was they formed artist collectives. And so there were tons of artist collective exhibitions happening around the city. It was a really exciting time. And that's kind of what the generation that I came of age within. At the time, I published a zine called Some Jungle and another one called Jungle Pack. So this is from 1996. It's a little publication for a space titled Free Parking. That was kind of a pivotal social space for this moment of artist collectives. And the Jungle Pack piece included a little phrase, Le Freak C'est Chic, which was my own reference to this outcast aesthetic. A. Bronson, so one of the founders of Art Metropole, member of General Idea, asked me to join him for lunch because he said he saw the Jungle Pack and the Some Jungle zine, and he wanted to meet me. I couldn't believe it, of course. I was just so excited and nervous and thrilled, and I was astonished. And he said that it was that kind of reference to kind of the freak, the chic, that piqued his curiosity. So he told me he liked what I was doing, and he invited me to join the board at Art Metropole. So I joined the board from 2000 to 2009. So this was my entry into the institutions of the artist-run world here in Toronto. I tell this story because I think Colin Campbell's Bad Girls, the very little excerpt that we saw, she's trying to, how do I get in? How do I get inside? Please let me inside, right? How do I participate in this space that I'm on the outside of? So I'll now focus on Bad Girls, the video. So Bad Girls was made as a video in 20 segments, almost like a series in Netflix, right? It's not one video, it's kind of like a series of episodes. Now, of course, rather than streamed, this video was screened live each week. So each new episode would come out and it would be screened at the Cabana Room, which was a new wave club at Spadina and King. So think about how meta this is, right? The video is already set in the Spadina Hotel. The story is taking place at the Spadina Hotel, but you're watching it in the Spadina Hotel inside. You're watching the story of someone trying to get inside from the inside, right? You're one of the people that was admitted entrance. So it's a very self-reflective kind of mirror to the community. So this building, the Spadina Hotel, was recently the site of Quantum Coffee and is now a development site for a proposed 23-story building. Now think of what an episodic artwork feels like, right? This isn't a video that you see all at once. You see it in episodes, bit by bit, and you have to wait a week to see the next episode, to see what happens to Robin. I remember in the 90s, Lola magazine. I think some of you might be familiar with Lola magazine. And it taught me something about kind of episodic production. I remember how eagerly I and the artists around me waited for each new issue to be dropped off at the artist-run centers. Like it was kind of like you knew when the new issue came out, and everyone would like try to grab a copy of it. It wasn't like a magazine that you find in a store, which doesn't have that sense of occasion. This was like a free distributed in artist places. And so when it landed, it was very exciting. The magazine was gossipy rather than kind of critical or something like that. And so people would excitedly pore over each new issue to see if their friends or enemies were in it. Or if, gasp, someone had written about you, right? So that was part of the fun is, you know, what are we gonna discover in this new issue? These days, I'm doing a zine collaboration with my nephew Rio that's titled I Am Full of Holes. So these are our first 3 issues of the zine, which was launched here at Art Metropole. It comes out monthly, and I drop off each new issue at various artist-run centers like Art Met, Pumice Raft, The Plum, and others. This is a lot of work, as you can imagine, to distribute something like that. But I do think in this age of instant virtual access, there's a unique experience to be had in looking forward to a new episode of something, a story that's being narrated in real time. So I think this is an important element of the video, this idea that kind of it's happening in real time in a sense. As you're watching it, you're seeing the character's life story develop. Just incidentally, in the 90s, I used to dance in the basement of the Spadina Hotel, which was then called the Subway Room. It was a great place. I don't want to bore you with like party stories, but like it was really, really awesome. Like it went until like 9 or 10 in the morning, so it was definitely like a fun time. But it was only much later that I realized that I found out that artists used to hang out there also in the 1980s when Campbell was doing his screenings of Bad Girls. So I thought of it as this kind of electronic, techno, whatever space, but it had this previous history. So this is kind of what I mean about connect the dots. I'm trying to connect the dots in talking about Colin Campbell's work. So Bad Girls tells the story of two main characters, Robin, who we saw trying to get into the club, and Heidi at the Cabana Room. And they formed their two-woman band named Robin and the Robots. This is a little description that Colin Campbell gave about his video. This is what he said about it. They, so Robin and the Robots, this band, they are terrible and become an overnight success. The worldly European Heidi becomes a cocaine addict, but plays her cards right, keeps her mouth shut, and becomes the new solo diva of the Cabana Room with an avant-garde swastika and the combat gear skinhead act. Robin does talk shows and gets sued, has a lesbian affair with her manager, the fascistic Mrs. Susan, and gets burned, and finally does a nude photo session and gets fired. So a very kind of wonky description of a video to kind of match something of the aesthetics and the attitude of the artist. I'm quite amazed, like thinking about Heidi and Robin and Miss Susan. These characters, I think, would not be out of place at all in Walter Scott's Wendy comic books. I imagine many of you are familiar with the Wendy character. And just kind of her craziness, her world, I feel like, to me, it shares the DNA that Colin Campbell's also tapping into. In 2008, John Davies wrote an essay on Colin Campbell titled "I Did Not Know Him," on the gossips and ghosts of Colin Campbell, on occasion of a major exhibition of Campbell's work organized by Oakville Gallery. So this is the catalog for that exhibition. And so John Davies' essays is in this. Incidentally, John Davies also edited a collection of Colin Campbell's writings titled More Voiceover that was published by Concordia University Press very recently, just in 2021. But I'm going to quote from the essay here, I Did Not Know Him, on the gossip and ghosts of Colin Campbell. So this is John Davies writing. Campbell screened these technically bare bones works in regular installments at the Spadina Avenue musician and artist hangout, the Cabana Room. The tapes are explicitly about the Cabana Room and its patrons. They expertly capture how an art scene functions, its tensions and pretensions, its undeniable allure, and the strict divide of insider and outsider. In the video Modern Love, which is a kind of prequel video to Bad Girls, Campbell took on the role of Robin, a young Xerox operating wallflower from Thornhill, who finds herself in a short and unfulfilling relationship with showbiz impresario Lamonti Del Monte, a creation of the artist David Buchan. Robin returns in Bad Girls, where she goes from ugly duckling to glorious swan, becoming the star of the scene through her band, Robin and the Robots. Both videos, so Modern Love and Bad Girls, hilariously show a naive girl caught up in a perplexing modern world overrun with posers, and charlatans. Winningly oblivious to the fact that she might be a font of comedy, Campbell's characters are often ridiculously serious. Robin left an indelible impression on the Toronto art world psyche by crystallizing all our secret fears about our own social status. Philip Monk, the curator, who has studied the self-fashioning and self-representation of Toronto's art scene extensively, has singled out these tapes as, quote, a critical moment in the self-recognition of an art community. This, John Davies continues, is particularly true as Campbell received near instant feedback from the Cabana Room audience every week, which no doubt affected future installments of the series. So Philip Monk is a really important curator that has done a lot of work to kind of narrate Toronto's history and its kind of recurring aesthetic debates. In 1998, he curated a major exhibition at the power plant titled Picturing the Toronto Art Community, which was an amazing exhibition. No catalog exists. However, they were able to publish the one printed document in an issue of C magazine. So issue number 59, the September-November 1998 issue of C magazine includes a kind of 8 or 16-page insert, which is the only catalog for the exhibition Picturing the Toronto Arts Community. For some reason, the grants denied them the budget to print the book. So this is what we're left with. But it's a very important, very beautiful document that Philip Monk is writing about this idea of artists in Toronto during the 1980s producing artworks that take the form of portraits of their own scene, portraits of their own community. On the cover, you see this photograph by Rodney Weridan. It's a double portrait of Rodney Weridan and the artist Jorge Zonto, also a general idea. Just incidentally, my partner Chris Carreri has referred to that photograph in this sculpture that he made, a double portrait of himself and myself, taking on the roles of Rodney and Jorge and reenacting it as a kind of 3D sculpture, a kind of photograph that's popped out of 2D into 3D. Anyway, but I'll talk about, I'll quote at length what Philip Monk wrote in Picturing the Toronto Arts Community. This is what he says. We all arrive in the middle of things. Toronto's art scene has attracted waves of artists and art school graduates from across the country, from Winnipeg, Vancouver, Halifax, and elsewhere. In the late 1970s and early 80s, the name of the area that attracted them was Queen Street. Today, so now this is 1998, today in Toronto, the designation Queen Street is shorthand for the downtown entertainment and shopping district. 20 years ago, before it gained currency in the media, the name offhandedly referred to an energetic art community that lived, worked, and played in the neighborhood. The current boom in administered loft living trades on the imagined lifestyle of the artists, who for the most part no longer live there, and who in fact started to depart in the mid-1980s in the first wave of suburban discovery and commercial gentrification. This is no lament or accusation. He continues, art scenes achieve a critical density by their ability to attract others, by the images of them that are produced, as well as by what is said and written. Artists create works of art and the context for their making. I call this context the art community. This scene has a social side that cannot be pictured merely through displaying the artworks. Some may think that the social side is inconsequential to the meaning of works of art, but its dynamic can affect the creation. Other images, which tend to be those that the art community makes for itself and then disseminates more widely, play an active role in the scene's self-realization. Theatrical, ironic, sometimes frivolous, and often ephemeral, these self-fashioning images make an art scene self-conscious, but over time they are forgotten. They are left behind in the community's continuing development, inconsequent reorganizations, or they lose their visibility in favor of images that stabilize as collectible works of art, entering public collections, and thus becoming the subject of art history. Since so many of the images from that time were published originally in magazines produced by Toronto artists, we have borrowed the magazine format here to document this power plant exhibition. So Philip Monk is really describing the exhibition, but it's remarkable to me how pointedly Bad Girls is an example of precisely what he's saying, this kind of artists producing work that also reflects the conditions of their production, and those conditions are specifically understood as social, as a kind of community and a neighborhood and a zone and an area and a locale and a site, the Spadina Hotel. And it's those things which become a kind of magnet for others. It has a kind of allure. Ooh, as Robin said, I read about it in the Globe and Mail. This sounds like a cool bar, right? It generates a buzz, and that's what draws a newcomer to this community. In 2016, so 8 years, no, like almost 18 years after Picturing the Art Community, Philip Monk wrote this book titled Is Toronto Burning? 3 years in the making and unmaking of the Toronto art scene. Highly recommended. I'm going to quote what Philip Monk says about Colin Campbell's work. He first refers to modern love, and then he refers to Bad Girls. So this is Philip Monk now writing. Modern love is a picaresque tale of the ruin of a young woman told in a few short scenes. And the attraction to the art scene is, in part, to blame. Robin is a young woman from Thornhill, a suburb north of Toronto, who has moved downtown where she works as a Xerox operator. I find that so comical. Like, it's so postmodern and so meta and hilarious. Anyway, Robin works as a Xerox operator in a stock brokerage in one of the financial district's bank towers. Campbell's job, actually. And spends nights at the Beverly Tavern, an actual seedy Queen Street bar which hosted local bands and was frequented by artists and art students from nearby Ontario College of Art. To hear the new wave band Martha and the Muffins, the real band, before its Echo Beach hit. Robin occupies her own syncopated distance from the scene. She wants to be part of, exemplified in the very first shot of the video where she claps offbeat to the off-screen band. So already she's kind of like shown as someone who doesn't get it in a certain sense. She's offbeat. She occupies her own syncopated distance from the scene. Such a beautiful phrase. Instantly, we know that this is the clumsy rhythm of her own demise. Hapless Robin had appeal. So, in Bad Girls, Robin again is the center of attention, a star even. She has moved on up. She has moved on from her pickup artist boyfriend Monty and moved on from the Bev. She has moved on to another downtown new wave music venue, the Cabana Room. But alas, poor Robin, unlike the Beverly Tavern, the Cabana Room has a door policy. And Robin is, well, Robin. Part of Robin's gullibility that made her susceptible to Monty's con was her desire to be a star. Witness her comment on singer Anne Murray. She's from a small town like I am, and she made it big. But before you get to be a star, you have to be in with the in crowd, hence the door policy. But before we got to the door of the Cabana Room, over the tape's title we hear, toot toot, beep beep. Hey mister, have you got a dime? And we immediately recognize the then reviled, yet catchy disco tune of Donna Summer's 1979 Bad Girls. And remember that bad girls, sad girls, like everyone else, they come from near and far. Like everyone else, they want to be stars. So maybe not a bad girl. Robin, after all, is still like everyone else. And what we will soon find in Bad Girls is not a study of types, but of setting. Not of individuals, but of a milieu. And the milieu is the Toronto music scene substituting for the art scene. Milieus assign identity by enabling or denying entry. How do you get from a small town to the Toronto downtown art scene? That is the question. So we found ourselves at the door to the Cabana Room, which again was a real club, founded and run by video artists Susan Britton and Robin Wall. Unlike the coincidental institutional startups of YYZ and Mercer Union, the other artist-run centers, the Cabana Room was a rock and roll bar, video lounge, and performance space in one. And the first of the new scene's local artists hangout, a club with no pretensions except being cool. It was a club, but open to all, with no door policy, by the way. The Cabana Room was a mothballed 1950s cocktail lounge, decorated, as you expect by the name, in the rundown turn-of-the-century Spadina Hotel, a derelict drinking tavern on the fringe of the art community in a part of town deserted at night. Imagine Spadina and King being a fringe of the art community and a part of town deserted at night. The Cabana Room opened in July 20th, 1979. Soon after, Robin was at its door, having read about it in an article by Adele Friedman in Toronto's Globe and Mail. Real article, real journalist, real newspaper, all of them mocked in Bad Girls. But there, she suffers a litany of humiliations, not being trendy enough to gain entry from the doorman, who was played by General Idea's Felix Parts. Who does she think she is? Where's she from? Complains Robin of yet another patron let in past her. How am I ever going to get into the Cabana Room? Indeed, that is the question. But accidentally she does, by a fluke of having a ponytail requisite for a retro twist contest. Once inside, blithely unaware of the contest codes, she fails to follow the rules of the game. A heroine dances on when everyone else freezes behind her. She doesn't know the rules, the codes, the signifiers, the signaling, or merely mimicking of which will make her acceptable, to be seen to be an artist or artiste, and be recognized of a clique. With Bad Girls, Campbell crafted an artwork through which this art scene could identify itself in the social scene of the Cabana Room. And viewing episodes serially in the real Cabana Room, artists did. The Cabana Room was a social setting where the art scene's newly consolidated identity could be fluid enough to accommodate all that was experimental, transgressive, or merely mingling and posturing about it. The music club's ambience supplied the veneer of sociability. The identity Bad Girls reflected was more desire than reality, but that did not make it any less real. It was a desire for something other than regulated daytime roles. Ms. Britton, coked-out club manager of the fictitious Cabana Room, that is, rather than Susan Britton, the video artist. It was a nighttime mirror to the serious day-to-day construction of the art scene, with its institutional responsibilities, that called upon Canadian artists' bureaucratic tendency and Protestant work ethic, to quote A. Bronson, the founder of Art Metropole. But this mirror shone its dark reflection on other passions. It was not just the delight of seeing Colin Campbell, Susan Britton, Rodney Waridan, Ron Gave, Tim Gass, Steve Davey, and others in ridiculous situations. So imagine watching this video where you're seeing yourself and your friends in the video. So that kind of ridiculous scenario. And seeing the video in situ, so to speak, as if acted exactly where the audience was sitting, to be in on that. Of course it was ridiculous. But that was part of the pleasure of these images, the representation they offered of a particular scene the artists were familiar with, their own scene. In putting it all together in a scenario, then acting it, was Campbell analyzing the scene or parodying it? Was its story of Robin's rise and fall, is Bad Girls then an allegory? I don't think, this is Philip Monk writing, I don't think Campbell originally intended it so. Was anything really at stake in terms of art world ambition for these insiders of an outsider situation? There were no admonitory life lessons to be learned from this as a morality tale. Bad Girls is too camp for that. But retrospectively, as we reactivate the archive, perhaps yes, we could look on this work as an allegory of the art scene. Perhaps you might ask instead, with this assembly of art world insiders, whether Bad Girls actually was an allegory of admittance to the art scene. Recall what A. Bronson wrote, that a premiere of a new Colin Campbell tape at the Cabana Room was a little like attending the Academy Awards. So I return again to 1990, my first visits to Art Metropole, when I was still fresh out of high school in Scarborough. I was a kid, curious about the art world, and I didn't know much about it. I never went to art school, so I didn't have that kind of social group, that milieu, to let me in. As I said earlier, I didn't exist. Bad Girls, I think, is an allegory on how to exist in a scene of people on the margins, who nevertheless have their own codes of entry and admittance. It's an allegory of this aesthetic of outcasts that I mentioned earlier. This has something to do with what John Davies called a culture of gossip, oral histories that are mainly told in bars or events like this, rather than in museums. So I think that there's something of an oral quality about the way that the art scene, specifically in Toronto, reproduces itself. There are publications, of course, but the real operative thing, I think, from my experience, is that it's the gossip that is our version of art history. I think this has something to do with Art Metropole's ethics of activating and reactivating the archive. I think Art Metropole, this very event, is an instance of this kind of oral gossip way of a community reproducing itself. Colin Campbell grew up in the tiny farming community of Reston, Manitoba, and went on to represent Canada at the Venice Biennial. I was born in Lima, Peru, and grew up in Scarborough, an hour TTC ride to the glittering lights of downtown, and then went on to show in Documenta 12. Walter Scott, who made the Wendy series, grew up in Ganawage, on the south shore of the St. Lawrence River across from Montreal, and has gone on to publish his work in the New Yorker and the New York Times, and 4 books in this series. You should really look at this book and watch Bad Girls Side by Side. It's uncanny. But check out the prologue to Walter's Wendy book from 2014. She is putting the final touches on an application that may change her life. So she's waiting for that admittance, right? The application, the grant application. If they say, yes, I can do this. If they say no, I'm outside of the club, right? How do I get in? OMG, if I get accepted to the Flojo artist residency, I'll be so happy. 2 whole months to make artwork in my own studio. And why not? My artwork deserves legitimacy. It has to be given agency. So these are quotes from the first issue of Wendy. As we think of Robin and Bad Girls, we're thinking of what John Davies called a story from ugly duckling to glorious swan. But as John, I think, is well aware, this is not simply a story of from ugly duckling to swan, from rags to riches, from periphery to center, from uncool to cool. As Peggy Gale had asked, who are my friends and intimates, and what am I doing with them? I'm going to end with a short quote from Philip Monk, Is Toronto Burning? While screened first to an insider audience, Bad Girls had outsiders as its welcome. Its head is with the in crowd, but its heart is with sad bad girls. Between insiders and outsiders, trendies and geeks, the line sometimes is obscure, especially when new cultural movements are in formation. How, at the same time, does the twist become camp and disco outre, the one hip, the other condemned? Who is in on these decisions? Who besides the doorman enforces them? Obviously, there are signs that enable separation, who gets in and who doesn't. The quality of being off, you remember Robin is kind of offbeat. The quality of being off is a sign of this division, a marker of the line between out and in. Off is out, not in. The doorman instantly knows. Off is only read from the inside and regulated there, while participated in unconsciously on the outside, where one miscomprehends one's status. How am I ever going to get to the cabana room? Perhaps it is a matter of how self-consciously one inhabits identity, how one handles distance and ironic detachment, how one performs a role, and how one perceives, for want of a better word, camp. Robin cannot. Only the in-crowd's canniness can. When we view it, Bad Girls lends us this insider knowledge and places us at the center of the in-crowd as participants in the scene. So with that, I thank you for your attention. Yay!